Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I will explain you how a method called backcasting can help you to set much more relevant weekly objectives as part of your weekly review process. Look, we all know the situation. You have to think about what are my key priorities next week. And if you are a little bit like me over the last years, you might open your calendar first in order to determine your priorities. And let me tell you, that is a massive mistake. And backcasting is easy to understand and can help you a lot to take a step back from your daily hustles and from what is in your calendar and to really reconsider what are your key strategic priorities and what do you really need to do next week in order to advance your agenda. Alright, you might wonder now, what does this backcasting actually mean? So let me try to explain with a little bit of theory. So backcasting is one of many methods in strategic planning. Let me show you 3 others first before we get to backcasting to have some context. A very popular one is benchmarking. In benchmarking, you are analyzing your current situation and you try to derive a strategy and objectives in order to beat the benchmark. Then there's scenario planning. In scenario planning, again, you are analyzing your current situation. You try to come up with different scenarios for the future, and this is informing your strategy and your objectives. And then there's forecasting. Forecasting is obviously the opposite of backcasting. And in forecasting, you are looking in the past. You have historic data which you are using to predict the future. And this again is informing your strategy and it's informing your objectives. So backcasting is now a method which is starting with the future. You are formulating a state you want to reach in the future first. Could be 1 year down the road or a quarter down the road or maybe even much longer. And you are really specific in what kind of desirable state you want to reach or what kind of outcome you want to achieve. And then you might have already guessed it, you are simply working your way backwards, right? You define the milestones which have to be reached in order to get to this future state. You think through the policies which have to be in place, the initiatives you might start. You are really trying to deconstruct this future and put it into different pieces, and you are thinking through of what has to be achieved. And especially in very complex scenarios, it is really a great exercise to do so, because by going backwards you are realizing everything you have to be doing. Look, this is no rocket science. Actually, all of us are backcasting more or less every single day. When you plan your next holiday trip, you are backcasting, right? You want to be in Italy. So what has to happen in order for you to be in Italy next summer? And then you go backwards and you are deconstructing of what has to happen to be in Italy. But nevertheless, even though if we do this quite often subconsciously, it is very beneficial to do this very deliberately at the point in time where you try to plan your upcoming week. Let me show you how I do it. By the way, this episode is part of a 5-part series all around the weekly review process. So if you want to make sure to not miss any episode, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to get the notification, and check out the description down below because I leave there a link to the whole playlist so that you can check out all the other episodes. Let me try to explain my personal goal setting system I have in place right now. It consists of 4 different components. Component 1 are aspirational yearly objectives. Component 2 are quarterly objectives and key results. Component 3 are the top 3 priorities I plan for every upcoming week. And component number 4 are my daily top 3 priorities. That is everything I have in my system, and that is the system is one form of backcasting implemented. And let me explain you why with one really easy example. So one example from the past could be that I was at one point in time thinking about launching a big business intelligence initiative in my company in order to replace lots of different manual reporting tasks by a BI system. And I really had in January this vision of how the whole company could work differently by the end of the year if this would be successfully implemented. So this was one of my aspirational objectives for this year, which I defined in January. What I then did in the next step, I really tried to break it down into quarterly objectives and key results. for me personally, for the team working on it, and also for the company as a whole. What I'm not doing is obviously I'm not doing in January writing down the OKRs for every single objective. I start with the first quarter. Nevertheless, what I'm doing, which is again part of this backcasting process to decompose this future you want to achieve, I gave all 4 quarters themes. I knew that in the first quarter it will all be around learning, feasibility checks, figuring out the current situation and if this can be achieved and how I would have to do it. Quarter 1. I knew that in quarter 2 we need to start building something and we need to get to this MVP stage in order to have something in hand which we can show to real users based on real use cases. I then knew that probably in the third quarter we will refine this MVP and get it to a point that it's actually creating value for our users. And I knew that in the fourth quarter, quite likely we start some level of rollout and some level of further development. And this was enough for me in order to have a rough idea of how the year will be like and to decompose my future. Then, when I have for a given quarter my objectives and key results defined, at every single weekly review process, I'm not starting with my calendar. I'm starting with the OKRs and I'm starting to break it down further from, this quarter I need to reach these key results. This is what we need to deliver. And this is informing my thinking of what are my top 3 priorities for the upcoming week. And I'm not starting with my calendar, but I'm starting with this future vision, with the quarterly objectives and key results. And then I think about my top 3 weekly priorities without looking at the calendar. I can't say this often enough. And let's go one step further and think through of how you can do this for real in practice. So let me give you 3 practical tips of how you can make backcasting work for your weekly goal setting. Advice number 1 is don't over-engineer it. It doesn't need to be complicated, it doesn't need to be sophisticated, you don't need to develop now a weekly project plan. Doesn't make sense. The only thing you want to do is, in your weekly review, be aware of your aspirational yearly objectives, go through your current OKRs, and then think about, knowing this, what do I really need to get done the upcoming week? And that's it. Second, start small. When I started doing weekly priorities or weekly objectives, I was always quite ambitious and I wrote 3 things down. Sometimes I probably would love to have written 5 things down. And then by Thursday I checked in again and I was like, I am completely off track. I will never achieve my weekly objectives. And that is really a bad thing. Start small. Start just with 1 weekly objective and just develop the rigor and discipline that you really do everything you can in order to achieve this 1 weekly goal. If you can do this, you will have a lot of power that every week you know you can define something which you will achieve. Start small and make it more complicated or more ambitious or make it more priorities. I really recommend just 3 later. And the third thing which I recommend you, and this now might be a surprise, at the very end of this process of backcasting and thinking around, okay, what do I need to do next? Now look at your calendar. I'm not saying that you should ignore your calendar, right? This is nonsense. Now you need to look at your calendar. You need to do a feasibility check of how you maybe can change your calendar the upcoming week. That now that you are aware that these 3 things are really important and you are realizing, I don't have enough time and I have maybe the wrong meetings. Now is the time to change it and to make adjustments to your calendar. And if it's really unfeasible to do something, although you think it's highly important that this is done this week, at least write yourself a note in the note-taking system you have for the upcoming weekly review that you have already thought about that this is a high priority and that you couldn't make it because of your calendar and there's something important maybe happening, big workshop, whatsoever, and then you directly know next time that this is already on your top list of weekly objectives. So maybe keep a list of candidates for weekly objectives you already have been thinking about. So I hope this helps. This should really help you to stop be driven by your calendar, stop be driven by urgencies, stop be driven by short sight when it comes to making weekly objectives work for you, and be much more deliberate around what you really need to do to achieve the future you want yourself. Alright, that's already it for this episode. So leave me a comment down below and tell me how you determine your weekly objectives. I would be really curious to learn more about your learnings in this process. So check out the other episodes in this series if you want right after this, and if you haven't watched them yet. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to not miss any upcoming episode. And thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. See you next time.